Good morning, everyone, and thank you for dialing in to another Executive Insight on Leadership webinar here for the month of April. We are extremely happy to be joined by Michael Santarcangelo today, and I know that Michael is going to share a lot of best practices and ways to help improve your performance, your outcome, the way in which your team operates together, and the way in which you think about operating, not just among your team, but across your enterprise and throughout your ecosystem. My name is Tim Rischulte, the CEO of the Professional Development Academy, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this Executive Insight on Leadership webinar, a webinar series that we offer to our alumni from the Professional Development Academy. Welcome to you, the alumni members, your supervising managers. Welcome to you all who are joining us, as well as current participants in our program. You may be very familiar with the fact that in January we launched a group of cohorts that just recently graduated. They finished their 12-week online program this past week, just last Friday. And so for those of you that are joining in, welcome, most recent graduates. And some of you I know are joining in that were in our program way back from 2014. Our next group of cohorts is launching this month here in April, just next week on Monday, the 22nd, and then we've got more starts throughout the year. So again, welcome alumni, welcome current participants, and we look forward to this time each month where we bring executives and thought leaders such as Michael to you live. You all have gotten accustomed to hearing from executives and thought leaders as part of the program in video format and learning from their best practices, their know-how, their wisdom, and they're really, extending and sharing their experience to all of us who really benefit from that experience relative to our day-to-day challenges. Speaking of day-to-day challenges, I will encourage everyone to use the chat feature in this WebEx session. If you've got current challenges, if you've got problems or issues that you're currently trying to resolve, feel free to document those, share those with us. If you've got questions that you are currently trying to wrestle with, I know that Michael would really love to present his material around some of those cases that you're currently working on. And to give you a bit of background as to who Michael is and what it is that we're about ready to get into, let me offer a bit of background regarding Michael Santarcangelo. He is an executive thought leader. He is an author of Into the Breach. He brings, a couple decades of experience from small business, mid-sized business, large enterprise, Fortune level businesses, as well as across industries to this presentation and brings that experience to you. The great thing that I really love about Michael is he recognizes that there's not a one solution fits all. He recognizes that it's important to really get to know the problem first, get to know the organization and the people in that organization, because what works well for one organization isn't necessarily a best practice for another organization. So it's taking those quote-unquote best practices seriously, yet lightly in terms of the context and the people and the organizations and industries that are involved. And one thing that I really love, if Michael was to have a mantra, it probably would be something like, I believe to be successful, we need to work together, and we'll talk straight and be better for it. And that's really what this presentation is going to be about. It's about straight talk on execution with better stories. And, Michael is an expert in this area, a thought leader relative to cybersecurity specifically, but then really how that can be leveraged across leaders, outside of cybersecurity. So really it's about everybody and the leader that we're trying to be. And Michael knows that one thing that we try to do is make leaders better and make emerging leaders ready, and that's what Michael really brings every day as well. So Michael, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your thought leadership with us this month for this webinar. We really appreciate it. And just for the benefit of everyone else here on the line, it should be known that Michael and the Professional Development Academy go back to the origin of the Professional Development Academy back several years, back to 2014 when we were starting the work. And Michael, I just want to say thank you on behalf of all of our graduates, all of our current participants and their supervising managers. Your early insights and work with us during the research phase in 2014 when we were designing and developing the Professional Academy, your fingerprints and mind share is all across our cyber program, as well as our high-performance leadership program, as well as our frontline IT program. And just on behalf of everyone here at the team of the Academy and all of our alumni and participants, Michael, thank you. Thank you for your friendship and your work with us from the very beginning, and thank you for your continued dedication to make leaders better. And we really look forward to this presentation from you. We'll monitor the chat box for you and help facilitate conversations along the way. Again, I encourage everyone, if you've got questions, use the chat box. We'll be monitoring that. And Michael, again, thank you. I'll hand it over to you at this point.
Tim, I need to bring you with me on the road. I mean, thank you. You know what? I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. It's interesting where you captured that mantra, and I don't remember if that's something I had written at some point, but I've recently done some of my own discovery in terms of how we operate as a company and what really drives me. And it's fascinating because the one thing that came out was all about the need to come together, how we can do so much more when we're connected and working together than when we're wasting our time dividing and stuff. And that's a lot of what I want to be able to talk about today. So I'm excited. And I'm really glad that Tim mentioned there's not one size fits all. I think the one thing that's driven most of my work is how to help people do better, realizing that there's no single way. And there's no faster way to frustrate me than to tell me there's only one way to do something. And so so today, that's where we've offered, if you have a real challenge, post it up. And if you're not comfortable putting it in front of people, you can always reach out to me, and as Tim will attest, I'll be happy to chat with you and figure that out. So let's dive into it, and I'm going to open up by asking you the question that is at the top of everything that I always ask, which is, what problem are you trying to solve? Now, let me be careful. I don't ask it pejoratively. I don't ask it to try to insult people. It's really about clarity. This is one of the most powerful clarifying questions I've ever been able to ask people, and I'll be really blunt. Mostly, they don't know. They kind of know, and that's okay because we can guide people through this. So this is a really important question because if we don't know what exactly we're trying to get accomplished, it's really hard to do that. But I'm curious then why you're here today. What are the problems you're trying to solve? And I started to put some in the chat to see if I couldn't see to get it going. One of the big challenges I'm working with the leaders that I support is influencing without authority. And it's influencing the way people think. It's influencing their actions. I think at some level it's influencing their feelings. It's that perennial challenge, right? We've got to do more with less. How are we possibly going to get that done? I'm noticing a lot of people, especially in leadership positions, feel so overwhelmed. They're not sure where they should focus. What should I focus on? What order should I do it, right? All those types of things. And then we feel stymied because we're depending on other people for our success. And we need to demonstrate success. And P.S., they're busy, and it's really hard to get their attention. So I think these are a lot of the things that we're trying to get into here. But what we'll notice common to this, or one of the things I detected a number of years ago, is that we all are also trying to overcome friction. And friction creeps in. And the problem with friction, if we go to the next slide, is that it destroys trust and it erodes value. So what happens a lot of times is this friction, especially in communication, but it can also be in process. It can be in the technology choices that we have. Those of you familiar with the concept of technical debt might see some of this pop up there. So what happens a lot of times is this friction creeps in. We don't pay attention to it. We're not mindful of it. But I'll tell you how you'll start to see it. You fought tooth and nail to get that project done. You got the PO approved. The project just got started, and everybody showed up to the launch meeting. And typically, what we see is within about 2 to 3 weeks, people can't make it. They'll agree to something, then come back and go, "Oh, I can't do that," or "I don't remember agreeing to that." Right? I call those the boomerang decisions. We start to see that things slow down. We start to miss dates. A lot of times, the way we deal with this in technology is we change the goalposts a little bit. "Oh, I didn't understand this piece to it." But what starts to happen is that friction is disconnecting people from value. It's disconnecting us from value. It's disconnecting us from the value of that process or that project or whatever it was that we're trying to do. And the end result of this is everything gets more complicated, more expensive, more time consuming. So although what we're going to talk about today is a lot about how we place emphasis on value, the opposite of value is friction, because friction will destroy that, but it also takes that trust with it. So what we need to figure out is, how do we achieve our goals? How do we get done what we want? And in a way that allows us to overcome that friction. And the answer is frameworks. Now, I sometimes use these a little bit interchangeably, and it's not entirely fair, so I'll try not to. A framework, I'm going to explain that in a second here. But a framework is also structure. And structure is actually the best antidote to friction, especially when you can be transparent with that structure, when you can share that with other people and they can see it and they know how it starts to work. But what I love about frameworks in particular, I'm going to explain them in a second, but what I love is it's this brilliant way to organize your insights and your experience. So think about that for a second, right? You already have a ton of experience. You have insights. You've lived life. You've invested in your leadership. You've worked. That's all valuable. That's got a ton of value in it. But sometimes what we need is a way to think about it differently, or a way to organize it, or a way to actually see how it all comes together. And that's what we can do. But what's also nice is if that works for you, the power of a proper framework is that also works for somebody else who has a different set of experiences, a different background, a different preferred style or method of working or getting things done. And you can actually work together differently, but towards the same outcome. So we can also use these then to guide the action and structure our development stuff. So let me give you the 3 parts to a framework. And this work for me has come for a long time. And I know in technology, I mean, I myself have said it, the beauty of security in particular is there's so many frameworks to choose from. There's so many compliance regulations. There's so many best practices. There's so many whatevers. So I'm using this in a pretty literal sense that a framework, and it only has to have 3 things. There's an element, there's an outcome, and there's a connection. So the element is what you satisfy. The outcome is typically, I use it as some sort of a prompt, but it's to make sure that you achieved the appropriate outcome that element set out for, and then there's a connection. And that starts to help us understand how these things are related. That's it. What you'll not see here as specified is there's a way to do it. Nope. That's the beauty of this, and that's the power of it. And it's also sometimes a little hard to wrap your head around. But what I personally love about this is you can have a completely different way of doing it. In fact, you're going to hear me say this in a minute. What I love about this is you can develop your own individualized system. So can your team. So can the other people that you work with. Because what you're trying to do is achieve an outcome by focusing on specific elements. So just, as we go through this, I just want to kind of say, the key is this, just start. And so let me explain that for just a couple seconds here, right? Because as we go through 3 things that I'm going to share with you here, all I want you to do is focus on element levels. You guys go ahead to the next slide. But keep in mind, and I've already said this, you're valuable. Your experience is valuable. One of the things that has absolutely frustrated me in my career is when somebody says, oh, I've got this great thing. There's only 18 steps. And you've got to do these 7 when you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and these 5 before you go to bed at 11. Oh, stop. I mean, if it works for you, it's great. Then don't take my flippant nature out of context. But all I'm asking is this. Just if you want to do any of the stuff that I'm laying out for you, I've given you enough to get started. You may not get mastery of it today. I wouldn't expect that. I hope you wouldn't expect that. You will absolutely have questions. You can always reach out to me with those questions. But if you just start at the element level, just the headings, just understanding those questions or those elements that I'm about to share with you, you will see how it organizes your insight and your experience. And with that insight and experience that you have, you'll see how it works. You'll see what makes sense to you in the places where you're not sure of it. And so let go about worrying about the right way. There's no right way. Let go about being right. Oh gosh, you don't worry about that at all. And don't worry about understanding if you get the outcomes right or not, because that could come later too. Some of this is about how you fashion your experience into a framework. And then just do the best you can, because you'll see what feels comfortable, you'll see what's uncomfortable. And that discomfort, to me, that's what I chase. That is that signal for growth. There's a difference between discomfort and pain. Avoid pain. But the discomfort, good. That means you've got something to learn. You've got a way to improve. And as a leader, I hope you're investing in yourself and you're looking for ways to elevate. And then when you want more, that's where you can learn about the outcomes. That's where you can learn about the connections. That's where all that stuff is there. And it'll make more sense because you'll be ready for it. And again, at any point, you can always reach out to me. So what I'm going to do now in the brief time that we have left is I'm going to share a couple different things that Tim and I talked about, and Alicia and Tim and I talked about, in order to make sure that you can be more successful today. You can put these things to work today if you wanted to. 2 quick things. Everything that I'm going to share with you, I use. In fact, I used almost all of it to get ready for today. And it's all designed for application. I like theory. I like understanding how things work. But really what I'm curious is, can we get people to a better place rapidly? And then can we explore how to get better over a way that we go? All right, so straight talk. That's what we're going to start with. It's something I've been spending a lot of time on for the last couple of years. First question is, what's straight talk? Because what I love is people say, oh, love that, love straight talk, need more of that. And then if I say, cool, what is straight talk? They feel that they're being set up, and so they get worried about it. So just in your head, if you see that phrase, what do you think that is? I'll tell you some of the common misconceptions that I like to overcome pretty quick. People think it's that opportunity to be smash mouth. I'm going to tell them what I think. I'm going to tell them how it is. They're going to have to listen to me. I'm going to push them back. I'm going to punch them in the throat, that type of thing. I don't know what that is, but it's certainly not straight talk. That's just not really helping people at all. Bottom line, here's what straight talk is. It's the way that we identify, that we articulate, that we translate value into understanding, right? It answers that question, how do we connect with the people that we need? How do we influence people in terms of how they think, how they feel, ultimately how they act? And as you see here, I love learning from our kids. The shortest distance between 2 points is A. And I pulled one of my older children up today. He goes, straight line. I go, great. Shortest distance between two people, straight talk. The idea of straight talk is that it's about connection. It's realizing that as much as we want our voice heard, everybody else does too. It's realizing that if we can connect with people, if we can engage them, if we can offer them something of value, if we can translate our value into something that they understand, then we have that opportunity to come together. And if we're connected to our value and they're connected to their value, man, the stuff we can do is absolutely fantastic. So a lot of people go, oh, okay, it's about a way to communicate, right? Because it says the word talk in it. Absolutely. But I'll tell you what, it's more than communication. It's a mindset. In fact, I think the most important aspect of straight talk is it's this mindset. It's this mindset that says, I'm going to focus on what's valuable. If you don't know yet what's valuable, that's where you start. It means you're going to focus for yourself on things that are valuable. It means that when you communicate with somebody, you're going to think about value, and you're going to work with them on that. It's a skill set. I've overcome myths for years where people will say, oh, Michael, communication. You're either born with it or you're not. Stop it. Oh, some people are just natural, some aren't. All right, I might buy that. But I can tell you definitively. In fact, it always struck me as interesting. So I have a degree that blends the soft sciences with the hard sciences. I'll tell you, the soft sciences are always much harder to learn than the hard ones. And so by calling communication a soft skill, and that's the way we downplay it. Oh, I'll tell you what, I can teach engineering and security a lot easier than I can teach some of these other types of things. So you can learn it, you can do it, and it's a skill set. But then mostly, it's also an experience. When you've been around somebody who's talking straight. They get right to the point, but you feel heard. In fact, what I love is when we do this with people and they'll say something to the effect of, this is amazing. This meeting went super fast. And I'll say, okay, did we get it? We got it done. I know what needs to happen next. I got to share my experience. We even had a joke in it. That's amazing. Sure, we cut out the fluff. We got right down to what people wanted. And we got it all kind of figured out. All right, so let me show you what's in this in kind of just a couple pictures real quick. And this is something I've been working on and updating. So the straight talk framework itself says you need to answer 5 questions. Then you consider 3 perspectives, and then we work through 3 rounds. Now, the reality of this is it's actually kind of an interesting progressive framework. So that first question I've already given you, and I'll go through these in a second. But the first question is, what problem are you trying to solve? A lot of times, you answer that question, boom, you've got clarity, and you're on to the next. You don't need to do anything else with this. What you'll start to see is this is almost like a Swiss Army knife in terms of how you do things or how you think about things. But let me go ahead and give you these questions real quick on the next slide. So these 5 questions, this came out of a number of years of work. They started to surface and coalesce about 5 years ago. I tweaked them pretty aggressively about a year ago to really get down to the right order. So this is all designed around how do we identify what's valuable, how do we communicate that value to somebody else, and how do we then use that to make better decisions. So I specifically looked at how do we get projects on track? How do we communicate something because we need a buy-in or we need an incentive or we need something to change? These are the questions that we have to be prepared to ask and answer. So what problem are we trying to solve? And I'll tell you right now that is the most deceptive question in the world. It seems so simple in your head until you start trying to explain it to somebody else. And then you start realizing that you're actually describing a compound problem that itself is predicated on compound problems. Now, when we ask about the value, I'm asking about the value of solving the problem, or I'm asking about the value of the specific solution. It's intentionally vague because what we're really trying to say is this valuable? Remember, value is a measure of priority. When we ask about impact, I'm actually asking about friction. How, if we do this, if we take this action, whatever that is, to get this solution, to solve this problem, what are we doing? And so the way I look at this is just a rule of thumb. If the impact's positive, that means you're going to multiply the value. That's awesome. In other words, a lot of times in security, if I can help you gain efficiency in the balance of your organization, and also protect information, what's in that positive? Like a lot of positive, great, good. That's a value multiplier. Now, if the solution or the approach requires people to completely wholesale change how they're doing things, and it just becomes a burden, right? Because sometimes you can change, and it's a short-term pain, long-term gain. That's cool. But if you look at something and go, well, we're adding a new layer of technology. Well, we're adding 5 new steps to something. Well, we're completely changing the way this part of the organization thinks about it. You're jacking friction up. And by the way, if you go back now and you retroactively look at some of the projects that you've been part of that did that, you'll start to see, wow, they really didn't work, and they really irritated a lot of people, and they really complicated things. Yeah, that's because of the friction. And we always overlook that. I'll give you another little quick tip because I want to get to the execution stuff. Just those first 3 questions form a proper value proposition. What problem? What's the value? And what's the impact? If you've done any marketing background, people will tell you that third part's actually about differentiation. I'll give you a qualified, yeah, sure, whatever. No, it's about impact. Because value is subjective, so the impact is also subjective. If you tell me it's really valuable, and I say, cool, how's it going to work for me? And you don't know. Or we start looking at it, and it's really going to just completely upset everything we're working on. It's not valuable. It's the opposite of value. It's negative value. How do we measure? Measurement, I've actually got some thoughts on measurement coming up in the next framework, and I'll show people how that works. I will tell you this stymies most of the groups that I work with because it's not something we're comfortable with. And then are we ready? Are we ready takes a lot of forms, and it's fascinating because when I ask it, I usually get 2 answers at the same time, yes and no. And so then we go unpack it, and we go figure it out. So those are the 5 questions. There's a lot of depth behind those. If we go to the next slide, when you take a look at the perspectives, what happens a lot of times is we tend to look at it from our perspective, whether we're the person asking it or we're the person answering it. But what you start to realize, and where this really came to life for me, I was doing a leadership event with a group of CISOs, and a guy got up after me at lunch and started out by saying, hey, I'm so-and-so from Redacted, and I'm here to sell you, right? Oh, fastest way for a group to check out is humanly possible. And that's actually the birth of where the Straight Talk framework came around. And afterwards over drinks and talking with him and the CISOs and everybody else, I started realizing that, one of the challenges is we might be able to ask the question. We might be able to get the answer, but we might still have to go to somebody else who's going to approve it or otherwise assess our attitude or our action on that. And so when you start adding all those things together, there's 3 different perspectives basically. It's the person who's asking the question, it's the person who's answering the question, and the person who's assessing it. You can change this up any way you want. This is just a basic guide to say, did you consider at least 3 perspectives? Now, I'll be blunt. That's kind of an advanced thing. It's called perspective taking. It's insanely valuable. You'll see a lot written these days about tactical empathy and emotional intelligence. This all fits nicely into that. If it's something you're super comfortable with, you'll enjoy the results of it. And if not, don't worry. We can get you there. All right, last part is the rounds. Now, this really starts to come into play as you involve more people. If it's just you don't always have to go through this, but I'm going to tell you right now, I go through this a lot. Here's the first thing. You do a discovery. You throw it all up there. I love whiteboards. Put it all up on the whiteboard. But then that next step is you distill down to value. That second round. Now, notice I didn't say consensus. I didn't say make everybody happy. I didn't say do what the group wants. You're distilling to value. You are looking at what's most valuable. And that third round is that's prepared a dialogue. That word's chosen very specifically. The difference between a discussion and a dialogue, or a debate and a dialogue, is in a discussion or debate, technically speaking, you're trying to prove your point, you're trying to be right, you're trying to win. In a dialogue, you're trying to understand. I much want understanding. Because one of the things that I've learned is if we take the time, all right, we'll talk at the end here about better stories, if we take the time to put together a better story and we offer it to somebody, and it actually connects, and it actually resonates, and it actually translates our value into something that they understand, that's super powerful. And they might also then know something we don't about why that's not right, why that won't work. how they already tried that. And if we shut them down, we don't learn. It's not about trying to prove to them. It's about trying to get to the right place, right? For me, it's all about getting to the right outcome in that situation where everybody's voice is heard. Everybody gets that chance to contribute. And that's exactly what we try to do. So let me just give you a couple thoughts here on how to get started with Straight Talk, and then we'll kind of move on. First thing is you start with those questions, those 5 questions. So what you're going to do there is, don't worry entirely about the outcomes. Don't worry yet at this point about the connections. What I like to recommend is put yourself on a timer, because otherwise you can get lost trying to answer all these things. If you feel like it, try some perspectives. Simply just try to answer the question from a different perspective. Somebody who's in a different group, somebody who's also in the meeting who is not part of your team, or sit with them and answer the questions. There's a lot of stuff you can do, and try out the rounds. But here's what I've started to find. So in the 4 or almost 5 years that I've been working with Straight Talk and looking at different ways of teaching it to people, what I found is the best teacher is to start using it. And so that's what we're going to talk about now, is this execution framework. All right, let me give you some of the backstory of where this came from. So, it's only fair if I say the first question we should ask is, what problem are you trying to solve? Let me tell you what problem this solves, and I'll tell you personally where it came from me, because this is something that's come out of some work this year. I don't know about you, but I was facing a pretty interesting struggle. So I'm trying to run my company and create value, right? Elevate people, accelerate results. It's all very important to me, and it's core to who I am. Also have 4 kids, and trying to be a good husband and a good father. And I'm also trying to be good to myself, physically healthy, emotionally healthy, living a good life and being able to enjoy all those types of things. And I would find myself consistently saying, I am overwhelmed. I can't make all these things work. If I focus on one, I feel like I'm not focused on the others, and I'm just kind of losing sight of it all. I, like a lot of you, have looked at different ways of planning, and I've been involved in these huge strategic planning efforts that, frankly, after a couple of months, don't make any sense at all. And for a number of years, I've tried to I'll lay out quarterly goals. They never made any sense to me. And so I started looking at the way that other people do this. And I've always been a fan of Bruce Lee, and one of the things I liked about Bruce Lee as a martial artist is he would study as much as he could and then draw on the things that worked and fashion them together. So the earlier part of this year, I kind of had a frustrating moment. I said, all right, there's got to be a better way. And for what it's worth, I've identified about 10 or 12 books. I think the list might be up to 15 that can start to influence this. And what I basically did was looked at the great work of other people. So you're going to hear a lot of things in this next part that I hope sound familiar to you. But what I started to figure out was how they all come together, how I can put something together that allows me to achieve across my personal goals, my family goals. You could add in community if you wanted, and business, and really get something done and really feel good about it, really executing. Now, what's interesting is, as I started implementing this for myself, I realized I can implement this for my clients. So I'm back to my clients. I said, all right, we're going to work. I know we do work on a quarterly cycle. I want to work in 10 or 12-week cycles within that quarter. And I want to really clarify, here's what we're going to do. And every single client said, oh, cool. I'm in. By the way, can you teach that to me? Oh, and I think possibly my team as well. Even when we were preparing this, I mentioned it to Tim, and Tim's like, oh, we should focus on that. Okay, cool. And Tim is not the only person that's had that kind of feedback. So I've looked at it. So I started asking people then, well, why? Like, what are you looking for out of an execution framework? And it turns out some of the challenges that we're facing are, well, how do I prove that what I did was valuable? Still about the influence, but the alignment is becoming a bigger deal too, especially when you're working with a team. If you're on a team today, what I've learned is once you get to about 17, see the magic number, 17 people and higher, your alignment gets really kind of sketchy. And it's the distinction between, do you have a group of high-performance individuals, right, collection of individuals, or do you have a team? And what you'll start seeing is this execution framework help us figure that out, as do the better stories, and we're going to get to that in a minute too. A lot of times too, it's finishing, not just starting. We're good at starting. We're great at starting. There's a lot of projects, a lot of plates spinning in the air. What'd you get done? What'd you move off your plate? What are you saying yes to? What can you say no to? Those are the things we're going to take a look at. So here's the 5 elements of the execution framework, right? So these are just the elements levels. Remember, framework's got elements, it's got outcomes, which typically you're going to have 3 to 5 prompts, ways to determine if you're on the right place or not, and then connections between those. We're just going to focus on the elements because this is enough. And I'll tell you right now, I use this to get ready for today because I had some stuff that was also due yesterday, and I have some stuff that's also due tomorrow. So I had to be really thoughtful about this because, in parallel, we decided to overhaul our front yard this weekend. Well, actually, that was decided before, but this was the weekend. And we had a big dump truck of mulch dumped in the front yard yesterday that needed to be dealt with. And so the family needed a plan to keep all of that stuff moving as well. So I have used all of these as recently as yesterday. And, I keep looking at that as we're trying to work on it. All right, so here's the 5 steps. Number 1, you paint a picture of a better tomorrow. Now, I'm going to talk about some of these things in a second, but the time horizon on this is no more than 12 weeks. So no longer than the 13-week quarter, really no longer than 12 weeks. You want some time in there for chaos or reflection or planning. So when I say paint a picture of the better tomorrow, I really mean, where are we going to be 3 months from now? How are things going to be better? Where are we going and why? Why is this where we're focusing our energy? And what's fascinating is this is often overlooked because, we've just got to get these things done. But then this is how we start to decide where to put our energy, where to put our effort. Then we identify the key outcomes. This is where if you're a management by objective group, your MBOs go here. If you're the objectives and key results, OKRs go here. If you're more into just smarter, iSmart goals, any way you want to do it, cool, they all go here as well. The real thing that's interesting here is, so what are the outcomes that help you achieve to that better tomorrow? And I like to limit it to 3. And then if you layer in a personal and a family or a community, right, you can have up to 5, but I don't want to have more than 3 in business. And even though this framework is fairly recent for me, this part's not, and I'll tell you right now, the more stuff you layer in, the less you will do. In fact, I've had a couple clients embrace this and come back to me and say, you know how you used to limit me to 3? Yeah. Well, I've limited myself to 1 because that's what we can execute against, and that's great because I would rather have 1 thing done well than 10 things not completed at all. Then you plan the pathway. So you'll start to see how this stacks, right? You'll plan the pathway. These are the steps. This is where I watch most high-performance people hand wave, eye roll, and go, I'm good. I know how to do it. Let me go ahead and explain. Yeah, you are good. And yeah, you do know how to do it. And you still need to write it down. There's a couple of reasons. I'll tell you the big one that worked for me. Write down the steps. Give me an approximation of how long it's going to take. Then go ahead, pull yourself out a calendar. Look at your next 10 weeks and show me where that time's going to fit. I do it for myself. In fact, this is on my schedule for later today and tomorrow for my own next 10 weeks. Yeah, that's an eye-opener because what we typically find is can't do it. Doesn't fit. Can't even borrow from the margins. Your nights and weekends, ideally filled with other things, but even if not, there's only so much time in the day. It's 24 hours. So what happens then is we get to figure that out, and then they execute. That's both a preparation for execution. So is there a routine or a ritual that you follow? Is there a process? Is there a sequence? I'll give you some examples that I found work really well for me. Time blocking, time boxing, actually scheduling out the time to do a particular task and holding to it. Thinking about your diet, thinking about your sleep, thinking about your work conditions. I've recently switched to a sit-stand desk, and after looking at them for years and thinking how awesome they would be, I finally said, yeah, let me get one. Yeah, wish I'd gotten one sooner. Does that work for you? I don't know, but it makes a change for me. I've got noise-canceling headphones, and I'm starting to experiment different ways to just kind of block out some sound and put some stuff. And it's interesting because I started just because the kids were home. Yeah, it's turning into a really interesting way for me to get into those flow states and really get after it. So those are the things you want to record in execution. It's not just execute the plan. It's what do I need to be successful to execute, and then you review. You review, you review, you review, you review, you review. And what you'll see is there's a lot of cycles. There's a daily review. There's a weekly review. You can do something in between depending on your time horizon. Now keep in mind, your time horizon could be as short as a day, and could be as long as 12 weeks. And simpler is always going to be better with this. All right, let me give you a couple things to think about as you go through this. All right, so to measure what matters. Now, what's interesting is if you're into OKRs, John Doerr wrote the book, Measure What Matters. What's fascinating is this is a phrasing I've been using for a decade, maybe 15 years, and it's really looking at measuring what matters, and it's looking at how we use measurement to guide action, not just report results. So what's cool is completely in alignment with the stuff that John Doerr did. In fact, it's a great book, and I'm really enjoying it. But here's the big key, and it's right on top, and it's super important. Separate out how you measure your outcomes from your plan, from your performance. One of the things that's absolutely awesome about frameworks is this ability to be diagnostic and prescriptive. See, it's not a system. It's not do it this way, and it's not even do it in this order necessarily. This weekend, my wife had a whole bunch of steps that she wanted to get done, wasn't sure how to organize them. We came into the office, I got a 4-foot by 6-foot whiteboard, we listed all the steps out, and then we were able to group them together. And then from that, our objectives, our outcomes became very super clear, as well as our timeline, and then we fit the steps into it. That's cool. You could totally do that. There's no right way or wrong way to do this. But now what happens is, when we sat down at the end of each day and reviewed, we said, okay, were our outcomes accurate? Did we set realistic outcomes? Did we understand what the success criteria looked like, and how did we do? And then we said, okay, how did we do in planning? Did we give ourselves enough time? Were there any steps that we missed? What did we learn from that experience? And then from a performance. Now, if you have kids, our kids range in age from 4 to almost 16. Okay, so how did they perform versus how did we perform versus what did we learn? And I'll tell you, what big lessons of the weekend was, if our meals weren't completely scheduled out and prepped ahead of time, they got really squirrely. Now, the kids don't mind eating out. I'd like to eat home a little bit more, and so we learned. So this is also why you review, and this is why you separate it. We did pretty good with outcomes. We did actually pretty good with planning. Turns out we got a little more mulch than we expected, so we've now tacked the day onto the plan, right? And we look at the performance. By the way, I do this with my clients all the time. I had a guy just last week call me, couldn't understand why a project was going sideways. I said, cool, let's go take a look at this. What's the better tomorrow look like? Well, we don't have that. All right, cool. What are your outcomes? And specifically, what does success look like? Well, I mean, I think we got some, but you don't know that. All right. So what are the plan? What are the steps? What are the things we need to do to get this? By the way, I picked up a tip last week that I think is really interesting. When you start that planning, the first 5 steps, make them as simple as possible. Easy things, because it's all about momentum. And what I've learned is progress reveals the pathway. So even if you can't see all the steps, get the ones down that you can. And then during your review cycle, you can add more into it if you need to. He said, yeah, well, we didn't really delineate those out too well. So, okay, well, how much time did you guys allocate to performance? Well, okay, guys, listen, I can tell you why the project's not working. We can't answer any of these basics. P.S., over the last week, we've kind of gone back and we've backfilled some of these pieces in. Oh, yeah, project's back on track. I mean, I'm not sure it's the right project. I'm not, but in terms of how you can use these things. Now, here's the other piece that's become really important to me, lead indicators and lag indicators. Lag indicators are the things we know. This is the outcome. Did we achieve our outcomes? Yes, we did. We're awesome. Give us a raise, boss. The lead indicators are the ones that are going to tell us about our performance. Did you actually sit down and journal in the morning like you're supposed to? Did you, at the end of your day, clarify what you got accomplished? Did you show gratitude? Right. I'm a big fan of gratitude. Did you show gratitude? Did you reflect on your day? Did you plan forward your next? I'm big on 3s. Your big 3 things for tomorrow. No? Okay, cool. That's interesting. Right? Might be, did you take your supplements? Did you get your 7 or 8 hours of sleep? Did you drink 8 glasses of water? Right? Whatever it is that helps you perform better. Those lead indicators, if you track them every day and start scoring yourself on a weekly basis, you're going to figure out. Right? And I could regale you with quotes all day. You could regale me with quotes all day about success as a habit, and our habits are predictors. Yeah, so you're looking at the lead indicators. This is so much more important to me than the lags, because the lags just tell us if we did it or not, and how successful we were at it. So they're important, and they're definitely important organizationally. But man, if you want to get better as a leader, this is the way to do it. All right, so let me give you some tips on how to get started with this, and I appreciate we're throwing a lot of stuff at you. First thing on this that was really important to me is that this is for aspirational and tacticals, right? What I call goals and projects. So what I've noticed with a lot of the frameworks that are out there is they want you to be aspirational. What are the goals? How will you elevate the organization? And believe me, I sound like I'm mocking that. I'm not. I think it's great. What I found with all my clients, what I found with myself was, Michael, that's great. But I got these other 7 things that have to get done. Don't care if they're aspirational or not. They got to get done. They have to get done. They fit into this. By the way, same thing as a picture of a better tomorrow. Like you still... Why am I doing this thing that's Monday? I don't really like it. Why am I doing it? People don't know why, and they don't see how they're going to measure success of it. I don't know. Good luck. I think it explains why a lot of stuff goes crazy for us. The timeline on this is really flexible. It's definitely not more than a quarter. Our timelines just don't work that way. And I get it. We got to have annual plans. I'm going to show you in a second how to deal with that. When we talk about better stories, I'll show you where annual and beyond planning comes in. So I'm not knocking it. I think it's great direction, but in terms of actually executing, actually getting things done, I mean, my goodness, I'm trying to think now beyond 10 weeks, and I don't know. Let me get through the next 10 weeks. I'll tell you what's up. In fact, sometimes it's literally in the last week I've used this framework 3 times just to get a couple days at a time. But I'll tell you what, man, I'm feeling a lot better about it. And that's because it's blending that life with work. I'm not worried about now if I'm doing the right stuff for me. I've had enough time to think about that. And I'm going to show you in a second with something I call the better story sequence. But then I also know what my kids are focusing on and how I'm guiding my family, and we're doing a lot better with that. Now the thing then is that, go ahead to the next slide, is that when you start doing this, first thing to think about is it's going to take you 2 or 3 cycles. Now I say 2 or 3 cycles. I probably don't mean 2 or 3 one day or 1 week cycles, but I think it's a great way to start. Something that's low stress, where you got some level of comfort, like doing some outdoor stuff or building something or some hobby, anything like that could work at work. When you go through any of these things and you look at the collective wisdom on it, it's anywhere from 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cycles to get something to work. What I look at is if you're just starting with you, and we can put the aspirations for your team and your colleagues on hold for a second, you got to give yourself a good 2, 3 cycles to really start to grok this. I don't know if any of you have done Agile training, if you've ever used something called a Kanban board. It's something I got turned on 2 years ago, and I can tell you definitively it took me a year and a half to really understand the power of it. I got value out of it instantly, but about a year and a half in, I was like, oh, this is how I can plan better. This is how I can control my work in progress to get stuff. Okay, all right, I get it. So when you want to do something like this, based on everything that we've shared in 20 minutes, just focus on you. Because the minute you're comfortable with it, right, you've built your individualized system, then the way that we do this with the teams I'm working with, and this is what we're working on right now, is then we go to kind of like what you call your leadership team. Might be what you're part of. And that's because, well, each of those people now needs to individualize it. So yeah, this absolutely stacks. This layers. It's great for that. But every time we do that, every layer, so whether you're doing a team or whatever, we're going to increase the friction. Those are what I call friction points. And the friction is not linear. It's exponential, which means you need to give people time to individualize the systems. Otherwise, they're trying to figure out what you're talking about and what these elements are, let alone the outcomes, and how it's going to work for them. They need time to get it to figure out how to work for them. Then we can bring people together. Because your individualized system it needs to work for you. The framework is what's going to bring us all together. Typically, when I work with the team, I'm setting expectations. We're at least 4 to 6 cycles by the time the whole team has it, and then we can really hit the turbo switch. Then we can do a lot of stuff. So how do you do this? Well, you start to use better stories. So this is the other part. And just for the record, I love collaborating with Tim as much as he enjoys working with me. And I got to talk through with this last week, and he's like, "Oh, well, you need to include straight talk. Definitely include the execution thing. But Michael, can you give it a little bit on stories in the end? That's interesting about better stories." So here's a little bit on better stories, and then we'll figure out if y'all have any questions or things I can do to help out with it. All right, so let me open with this challenge of this concept of being wired for story. I think it's true for what it's worth, and this is on that next slide. We are wired for story, right? And you'll hear that, oh, we're humans. We're designed for, yeah, we sure are. Being wired for story doesn't mean that we're wired to tell a good story. That doesn't mean you can't tell a good story. But, I was just helping somebody working on one of their stories yesterday. And after like 20 minutes or so, we said, cool. All right, let's go talk about what was actually necessary in that story. Let's go talk about the details. Let's bring it together. Let's shorten it out. What we tend to see a lot of times is that people will say, I'm going to tell you my story, and then they give you a series of information. Maybe it's facts, maybe it's not. It's something I call the perfect message fallacy. It's this idea that says, and I'm going to be a little blunt with my language, I don't really have time to prepare. I don't really know what's valuable. I don't really know what's valuable to them. I'm just going to lay it all out like a big old buffet, and they can grab what they want and do what they want with it. That doesn't work. It's just noise. All we've done is give them a lot of noise with the promise that there's some signal in there, but I'm not sure where, and good luck. And so they just kind of move on, and they go about their way. And then we go, oh, well, wired for story. No, we're not. We are. In fact, to be perfectly clear, I think each of us has a story. Right? One of my deeply held beliefs, each of us has our story, and our story is our value. And that's our struggles, that's our challenges, that's what we've overcome, that's what we've learned in the world. Each story deserves to be told and is worth hearing. I will always honor the stories of people that I meet, and I meet some really interesting people in some really interesting places, and I'll tell you what, I'm always better for it. And so I'm a big believer in these stories. So let's go to the next slide. If you have a story, and I'm just going to give this to you because a lot of times if I'm doing a keynote or I'm with a group, I'll say, hey, there's 3 things you need for a story. What are the 3 things that you need? And after a bunch of dumb silence, where people are like, man, I hope he doesn't call on me, and I'm not that style. I don't call on anybody. Someone goes, oh, a beginning, a middle, and an end. I don't know where we got that. I'm sure that's routed in some classical philosophy someplace. It also means absolutely nothing to most of us. Here's what you need. You need 3 things. You got to have characters, conflict, and resolution in a story. Characters. That means there's actual people involved. It means that there's emotion. There's something that we feel. There's a connection to it. Then there's a conflict. A lot of people don't like that word conflict because we think that it's very adversarial. Well, then call it tension if you want. But there's something there that we have to work through. It's a conflict. It's a tension. It's a problem. It's a turmoil. It could be good. But typically, it's some challenge that we're fearful of, something that we're worried about, and then it resolves. It resolves out. Those are the 3 basic things. I'm going to give you guys an example here in a second too. So when we think about this then, right, that resolution is that so what? All right, so let's go to what makes a better story. Because as I've thought about this for a little bit, right, so it's okay, so series of facts not good enough, stories are better. But I really got thinking about it because I've watched a lot of people tell pretty good stories that just missed the mark, didn't advance, right, didn't help us execute better, didn't align us better, didn't get us any place. And so I started realizing, all right, we need better stories. So that means I have to figure out what makes a better story. Well, the first thing is structure. Now, if you're into writing or you're into storytelling or you're into sculpture or photography, there's a structure to it. There just is. Yeah, one of the famous videos is of Kurt Vonnegut talking about the 7 types of stories. Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey is the most famous one. Sweet. There's a ton of stuff out there on structure. But the other 2 things that you need are context and value. You have to set the context for the story. And it's simple stuff. I mean, it's basic context is going to answer who, right, why. I mean, the order sometimes matters, but you're basically answering why, what, how, who, maybe when, maybe where. I mean, it's kind of like basic outlining, and yet commonly overlooked. Like you'll hear people say content is king. Okay, then context is queen. But actually, I kind of think context might be king and the content is the queen. And then it's value. Did you focus on something that was valuable to the other person? Because if you did, if you tell me a story that's valuable to me, you will have my rapt attention. If you tell me a story that's boring to me and not really connected to you, I'll probably tune out. If it's your story, all right, different deal. But that's not what we're talking about here. So let me give you guys an example of a better story. I'll give you 2 examples. I'll give you real quick. And then we'll talk about how to use some of these stories. So one of the stories, organization I worked with a couple years ago, they wanted to put in web filtering. If you're not familiar with web filtering, it basically sits between your computer and the internet, and its design is to block bad things, either direction. So typically what we'll see is we'll restrict violence, we'll restrict pornography, we'll restrict gambling. There's certain other things. And then, of course, known malware sites and other things that can do bad harm to your system and perhaps to your organization. So what had happened in this particular organization is they tried 4 times to install some sort of this web filtering solution. And the language they used was they said, we're going to put in this web filtering and we're going to block all these things. That's what people heard, block. Doesn't even matter what they said. And the connotation of it was essentially, you guys can't be trusted. You're the weakest link, and we're going to slam this in place. And the organization had just enough power that it got turned over every single time because people refused to be blocked. And they made very dire predictions about how that would impact the bottom line. So they brought me in. They said, Michael, we're kind of embarrassed we don't have this. We think we need to have it. Can you help us? And we went and we did something really simple, right? We just asked people about their experiences, not with security specifically in terms of web filtering. Just tell us what's up. Tell us what your job is like. Tell us what you're doing. P.S. It was a Fortune 50 company, but we asked I don't know, 1,000 people or so, maybe 1,500. We had like 600 responses in the first day. They were eager to have their voice heard. And some of them were exceptionally eager with very colorful language to have their voice heard. But it's great. All of it was great. Then what we did was we used the structure. We went over it. We used structure. We fit into it. We understood where their challenges were. And we set the context. So I'll tell you what we did. Instead of coming back and saying to this particular group, hey, we don't trust all of you, and therefore we're going to put in this web filtering, we say, hey, a lot of you have told us that you're concerned about your research. And you're concerned about bump, 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 bump. And you're worried about this, this, this. And you know what? We are too. And there's a couple things we can do, and one of these things we can do is put in this sort of safety net. Now, what this does, right, and we kind of explained it differently. Now, we were completely accurate. And then we said, and by the way, if you have a problem with it, here's Justin. We put up his picture. He's in California, and he has the power to move any of these blocks immediately and for up to 24 or 48 hours. And in that time, we can figure out what's up. So you will never be blocked from doing your legitimate work, and we should be able to give you more protection. And the only comment that came back was, what took you guys so long? Because, well, now they understood it. Now it had value. I'll give you another one that we're working on right now. So the story isn't completely put together, but we're working with a CISO who's trying to change the culture of his organization, and they need better controls, and they want people to not only take ownership of those, but they need to attest to those. And he was saying to me, I'm going to tell him that, the penalties for this could be the orange jumpsuit. I said, yeah, but are they really? He's like, well, they could be. I go, all right, name me the first person who's been arrested because they attested to a control and it didn't work, and now they're in prison. Yeah, okay. Well, I don't have any other. I said, but have you been through this? And he had. And I said, cool. So what was it like really? He said, well, I was in deposition hell. I said, okay, what does that mean? He's like, well, everything got put on hold for 2 weeks. I had to go back over everything. I had to prep it. I lost weight. I lost sleep. I was a bag of nerves. And then I had to sit there with cameras and lawyers and prosecutors and people asking a ton of questions. And oh, man, it was just disruptive. It was good. Let's go have that conversation. Let's go tell people what it's like and why we want them to take these steps now so we can avoid that stuff later. We've tested it loosely. Yeah, much different reaction to it. So how do we use these better stories? Well, we want to influence change in our organizations. We want to share information. We want to gather information. One of the things that's often overlooked is the ability to use narrative to learn. We don't just send information to people. We can request information. But one of the things I love is I call it story swapping. If you're using a better story, right, so what that means is you've got structure, you've set the context, and you're communicating something that you believe to be of value, and you're working to translate that so they understand it. They'll come back to you. Oh, you mean like? That's a sign you're about to story swap, and they're going to tell you a story. And if you get good at telling better stories, you can actually elevate their storytelling game because of the questions that you'll ask. And then you can counter with your own story. Oh, yeah, well, actually, it's kind of like this. And then you kind of tell, oh, you mean the time we, yes, but without, right, there you go. That's story swapping. Super powerful. By the way, don't forget to tell yourself a better story. I have actually for the last year and a half now been on a media fast, and I'm getting it tighter and tighter. Like I'm just, man, technology headlines in particular are so negative. Let me tell you all the things you're doing wrong. Let me tell you why this won't work. Let me tell you why you're screwing this up. You don't need that stuff. Nobody needs that. You're doing great. If you get up every day and you feed yourself a steady diet of bad ideas and negativity, how do you get stuff done in that day? How do you feel good about it? No, change the story you tell it yourself. And I'll tell you what, everything else will start to change and crowd that negativity out, and you'll be so much better for it. But all right, so let me give you real quick the straight talk, better story sequence. So it's 4 parts, which feels really weird to me. So we're going to call it 1 plus a triplet. First thing is you set that context. I just gave you the general gist of that. I started using this with security teams about a year and a half ago, and I'd say, hey, what's your context? Why do you guys exist? Well, security. Nope, wrong. And I'll give you a great example. One of the clients I work with, I love them. Security is core to their business, but it is not their business. They're a $1 billion business, and security is requested by all of their clients, but it is not. They don't sell security. And so what we did was we actually worked with the CEO and the board, and we said, what do you guys expect from security? And it got down to 3 things. Meet the client requirements that we have. Anticipate threats and changes so that we're not caught off guard, and we can it'd be in advance of our clients. And you know what? Differentiate us. Show us now, because security is so important to people. Differentiate us. There you go. You want to gather what drives a lot of the work that the security team does. It's our ability to do that, right? That's the context. That's that why. Then we laid out how they wanted to do it. Then we laid out what that means and what they provide and how they support. Such a difference, because people have actually said, "Wow, I get it now. I get what security does." That's just setting the context. Here's the three core stories. I want to know your current story. I want to know your better beyond and your better tomorrow. Now, the reason I do this, and I've been doing this for about a decade with people, the better beyond, for me, that's a time frame that you get to set. But if you're in the business world, it's 3 years. So I know I just told you you can set it, and you can tell me your group does 5-year projections, and so you want it to be 3 to 5 years, and that's awesome. Make it 3 to 5 years. No argument from me. If it was you and me just talking personally, and we're trying to figure out where you want to be as a person, I might ask you for 10 years or 15 years, right? This is do you want to be the executive? Do you want to run your own business? Do you want to be retired and live out a good portion of your life sailing around the world? That's cool. That's your better beyond. So here's the way this breaks down really simple. Your current situation, where are you now, and how did you get there? It's amazing how often we forget that, and it is such a valuable part of our own stories, but it's also a valuable part of your team. Where are you? And how did you get there? What were your challenges? What did you overcome? What are you excited about? And then you figure out the better beyond. So 3 years from now, and I love writing these in the present tense. Don't write it as we will. No. 3 years from now, if you were sitting down and writing this, what's better and why? And why is that exciting? And these absolutely have to include emotion. Why do you feel better about it? How are you thinking? How are things operating? Why is this better? And then you get to write your better tomorrow. And that better tomorrow, right, that's that feed in to the execution cycle. That your time horizon is 2-3 months. How are we literally going to be better in a blink of an eye? And that's it. But it's guided by the better beyond, which of course you can change. And it helps you understand where you are. Because where you are helps you understand where you can go to next. It's hard to have a pathway if you don't know where you are. Right? So those things come together, and that builds out that better story sequence. And again, with everything that I've shared with you, just take 20 minutes and write down your current story. Write down 20 minutes. Write down where you want to be in 3 years, and 20 minutes and write down, so where are you going to be in 12 weeks? Amazing. In fact, this is the most important exercise, because this is, if you write your story succinctly enough, get it down to a page, right, 500 words or so, you can read that in 3 to 5 minutes. Read that every day. Read it once a week. And you will stay exceptionally well connected to the work that you're doing, because that'll get you where you want to go. All right, so obviously we got a couple minutes for questions, but let me go ahead and just offer this is your turn. It's interesting because Tim talked about mantras, and I have a few. This is one of the ones that I've been developing over the last couple of years, and it's that the exceptional leaders, you're an exceptional leader. You invest in yourself, because it's all about elevating the people around us. Right, like one of this wasn't a leadership talk per se, but one of the things I always love to tell people is that you manage process, you lead people, and you boss nobody. Except for my 6-year-old went through a phase where she was the boss, and that was kind of cute. But for the most part, right, leading is about people, and it's really about elevating people. In each of these interactions that we have, we can either leave people better and elevated or not. So if you're investing in yourself today, that means the people around you will be elevated. That means that because they came into contact with you today, their tomorrow will literally be better. So on the next slide, some of what I'm doing now is I'm going to give you a couple thoughts here on how to do this, and I'm actually going through this journey myself. So here's the first thing. Just work at the elements level. And I'm going to just say it again, work at the elements level. This is my biggest aha. Last week, working with a client, I was racing ahead, and he finally stopped. He said, dude, this is awesome, and this has completely changed how we're going to execute this quarter. I don't need any more than that right now. Can we revisit that in a couple months? Light bulb went off. Oh, yeah. Maybe I should do the same thing. So that's what we're doing. Short time horizon. So, for example, I've already given you a couple examples how I've used it pretty tight. My time horizon for this quarter is actually going to be 9 weeks, and I got 1 week of travel in there for a client. I'm actually going to shorten it out 8 weeks. That's my time horizon, and I'll know more about it. Measure what you can. Don't get wrapped around the axle with it. Start paying attention to these things, because in the next cycle, you'll be a little bit better for it. And then in the next cycle, even better. And eventually, it'll click. Review, and then ask me your questions. If you take me up on any of this stuff, if you work through any of these pieces and you've got a question, straight offer, hit me with it. In fact, I'll be really candid. I'm going to create something called Straight Talk Answers, and I'm going to try to answer questions twice a week. So if you ask me questions, that'll make it a lot easier for me, and I appreciate that because although I'm not good at being selfish, I don't mind answering the stuff that you want. But here's the rest of it too. As you go through this, measure what you can, and then as I document this, as I told you, there's about 10 or 12 or 15 books. I'm going to actually publish out, here's the books, and here's where I kind of see them fitting. And then as I get through the books and I get my own understanding, I'll talk about the value of each one and where it might fit or not fit or how you can sub different stuff into it. And so my invitation to you, of course, then is to join me on this journey. So that's that next slide. I am going to write about this. It turned out there was enough interest in it. I've even had people just that I know casually, right, personally, like in the community, like, wait, you've got this execution thing? Hey, you ever need a guinea pig? You call me. I'll work with you on it. So I'm going to build this out. I'm going to build it out as a sequence. I'm going to share myself, what I'm learning, where it's working, where I've got to get better at it. And so if you want to join me on a journey, you can shoot me a note. I wish I could tell you I had it all, tricked out on the website. I don't. That's in my next 10 weeks is to kind of get the website harmonized with who I am and where we're going as a business. And so I'm excited about that. But, if you're Twitter, you can hit me on Twitter. That also works for Instagram, but don't look for stuff for me there. Really, if you want, shoot me an email, and I'll do what I can to help you. Or I promise Tim I can come back and help out there. And I know that we're at the top of our time. So I didn't save us a lot of time for questions. I'm not in a rush, or you can shoot me a note, and I will absolutely make time to answer it. Tim, however this works best for you. Thank you all for the opportunity to try to do my best to elevate you today, and I hope that you're better off for it.
Thank you so much, Michael. Always great to hear your executive insights and thoughts on what it means to be a leader, and so many great takeaways. We had a lot of some comments in the chat box about receiving this material. We're certainly happy to send this to you. We'll connect you with Michael via those emails as well. So if you are interested, feel free to drop us a note here in the chat box. We will make this available. And just as a synthesis of some of the key takeaways here, there is so much alignment with what you just shared, Michael, with what we have in the Academy regarding it is all about people. At the end of the day, it's all about people. And when we think about those people from a leadership perspective, it is about those connections. How do we connect with people? And it is about communication. Communication is the lifeblood of organizations, of teams, of individual performance and progress and outcomes. And it does start with ourselves. It starts with our own understanding of who we are, the values we have, living out those values every day in balance so that we can accomplish everything that is a priority to us. And in the process of doing that within a team, it's really understanding the priorities that they have with others. And the only way that we can know that is to get to know those individuals, to have that dialogue, not that debate. I love what you said, Michael, about the dialogue is a process of understanding, not a process to win. And so the takeaways are fantastic. And Michael, just want to thank you once again for continuing your investment in people and continuing to make leaders better. Next month, we will be joined by Dr. Mike Lewis. Mike is Vice President of Information Technology and CIO at Trillium Health Resources. And so hopefully everyone will be able to join us. There is a link right now in the chat box if you want to add that to your calendar. That is for May 21st. It'll be at the same time as we are right now. And again, on behalf of everyone at the Academy, thank you everyone for joining in. Again, thank you to Michael Santarcangelo. We hope everyone has a fantastic Tuesday, rest of your week, and if there's anything we can ever do to help, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.